that you are stuck in life is because you cannot bring yourself to be ordinary. Their life is built on this fantasy. They can accomplish amazing things. And if you're a Puer Aeternus, you know this. Why do these people exist? Because we're a society of Puer Aeterni. We're a whole generation of people who are living in our parents' basement. And this is the core of the psychological problem. This is what Jung really discovered, is that they cannot make a commitment, they cannot make a sacrifice, they cannot pay a cost without a guarantee of a gain. And if you cannot do that, you will never move forward in life. So over 100 years ago, Carl Jung described this archetype of someone who remains an eternal child. So these are people with a lot of like potential, do pretty well in like middle school, high school. Something happens around the time that they go to university. Maybe they get a job, maybe they don't get a job. And so they sort of have this trajectory in life that just kind of like fails to launch in the way that they should. Gifted kids are special needs kids. Even to this day, our most successful upload on our YouTube channel is about how gifted kids are special needs. And this archetype of someone who stays stuck in adolescence, right, never grows up, is made so much worse because their psychological vulnerabilities are being predated. Like technology is like the critical hit for this psychological vulnerability. The characteristics of the Puer Aeternus. So the Puer Aeternus is, first of all, charming, okay? So oftentimes these people they're kind of like childlike in a fun sort of way, right? So they're like, they tend to be actually pretty charismatic, but I see a lot of these people being like the life of the group that they're in. They tend to be the funny person in class. They're incredibly intelligent, quick-witted, kind of likable, right? So when people meet them for the first time, assuming the social anxiety gets out of the way, oftentimes people are initially impressed by the Puer Aeternus. They have a lot of potential. So when people meet them, they're like, wow, this kid is so smart. This kid is kind of going places. Oftentimes they'll have bursts of creative energy. But then the cycle that they sort of fall into is that even though they're like, they kind of come off as strong, they open, like, you know, as soon as the race starts and they start running, they like do really well. Inevitably, they falter. So like their ability to follow through, their ability to live up to expectations, their ability to deliver on expectations falls absolutely flat. They do not like conventional situations. They ask deep questions and go straight for truth. Undisciplined, long-legged youth who merely hangs around, his mind wandering indiscriminately so that sometimes one feels inclined to pour a bucket of cold water over his head. So this is what happens when you meet a Puer, okay? So they're like, first of all, they hate small talk. They're all about big ideas. They're all about grand things, right? So like, I want to be big. I want to think deep. I want to understand quantum mechanics. Like, I don't want to do this conventional life stuff. They tend to actually come across as brilliant or impressive when you first meet them. You get frustrated with them so easily, right? Because they're big talkers, but they just don't show up in the way that, you know, you actually need to live up to things in life. I want to talk for a second about this cherished fantasy life. So the basic problem with Puer Aeternus is they have big dreams, right? They have big ideas. They're incredibly intelligent. They've got large goals. But anytime they start to exist in life or try to live life, they are inevitably severely disappointed. So anytime they imagine an experience, like the experience is great, but the reality of the experience is like drab and disappointing in comparison. I have this great vision. And the moment that they start to engage in life and actually try to do it, the version that they encounter in real life is like a shadow of it. And Marie-Louise von Franz even talks about this in terms of relationships, okay? He is looking for a mother goddess, so that each time he is fascinated by a woman, he has later to discover that she is an ordinary human being. Once he has been intimate with her, the whole fascination vanishes, and he turns away disappointed, only to project the image anew onto one woman after another. The reality is inevitably disappointing. And so here's what the cycle of Puer Aeternus actually looks like. This is exactly what I think is important. So it is not that they put women on a pedestal, they put life on a pedestal. So I'm a person, and I have a vision of life. And then what happens is I engage in life. And then inevitably, it's boring, grueling, disappointing. Over here, you're filled with excitement, potential, but the reality of it never really like lines up. And then you end up feeling dejected, loss of motivation. There's some sort of obstacle that comes up. If a man pulls out of this youthful neurosis, then it is through work. There are, however, some misunderstandings in this connection. For the Puer Aeternus can work, as can all primitives or people with a weak ego complex, when fascinated or in a state of great enthusiasm. Then he can work 24 hours at a stretch or even longer, until he breaks down. But what he cannot do is to work on a dreary, rainy morning, when work is boring and one has to kick oneself into it. That is the one thing that Puer Aeternus cannot manage and will use any kind of excuse to avoid. So they're capable of brilliance. They're capable of hard work. They're capable of sweat and toil. But the moment that things become difficult, or, and this is what's really interesting, the moment that things become boring, the moment that things become drab, then they lose their ability to work. They can even do incredible things, okay? For the Puer Aeternus in the negative sense of the word is usually a very impatient disposition. A classical example of Puer Aeternus, who did a tremendous amount of mountaineering, but so much hated carrying a rucksack that he preferred to train himself even to sleep in the rain or snow, or wrap himself up in a silk raincoat, and with a kind of yoga breathing was able to sleep out of doors. He also trained himself to go practically without food, simply in order to not have to carry any weight. In a way, he led a very heroic existence, just in order to not be bound to go to a hut or carry a rucksack. The one thing he absolutely refuses is responsibility for anything. But what they can't do is ordinary. I am not going to be a normie. I'm going to be exceptional. But this is what their life is like. Their life is built on this fantasy. And this is what's really confusing about it, is that they can absolutely work incredibly hard. They can accomplish amazing things. And if you're a Puer Aeternus, you know this. You know that you've done things that ordinary human beings cannot do. But the reason that you are stuck in life is because you cannot bring yourself to be ordinary. The only option that you've got is extraordinary. Make sense? What a Puer Aeternus fears more than anything else is the loss of potential. So much potential, right? Like, you're a gifted kid. You can accomplish anything that you want. You have this weird heroism within you, like where, like, if you can find the right circumstances, then you can become this like demigod tier being. Puer Aeterni is a pluripotent stem cell. So this stem cell can be anything. The problem for Puer Aeternus is once you make a choice to differentiate, you lose the potential of everything else. So the moment that you make a commitment, this is the problem. Making a commitment means sacrificing all of the potential. And this is something they cannot do. And they're so paralyzed by being trapped in the drab existence of reality, right? Like, oh my God, if I have to debase myself to become a pleb and make small talk in a water cooler, in a cubicle, as a sheeple, I cannot tolerate that at all. Pathologically unable to make a commitment or make a sacrifice. And so what they end up doing is swimming around in a state of pluripotent stem cell, never making a commitment because they're terrified of closing off the doors of life. And if you are pathologically afraid of being trapped, you can never make a choice. So they sort of end up swimming around in this partial life, which H.G. Baines described as the provisional life. That is the strange attitude and feeling that one is not yet in real life. For the time being, one is doing this or that. But whether it is a woman or a job, it is not yet what is really wanted. And there's always the fantasy that sometime in the future, the real thing will come about. The one thing dreaded throughout by such a type of man is to be bound to anything whatever. There is a terrific fear of being the singular human being that one is. There is always the fear of being caught in a situation from which it is impossible to slip out. It is not a real life. It is not a full life. What this practically looks like is they will have these bursts of interest and activity. Remember, they can work for 24 hours at a stretch. I'm going to become an entrepreneur. I'm going to make a video game. I'm going to write a TV show. I'm going to make a book. I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to learn the piano. Something gets in the way. And then they tend to give up. They leave it alone. They go back to their fantasy world, which include things like video games, social media, pornography, whatever. And then their desire to do something great happens again. And then they pick up their next project. So what they end up living is like, 10 steps down a 100-step road, like in 15 different directions. They end up sort of existing and continuing to exist with a lot of potential without ever actually sort of creating any kind of actualization. Something called a failure to constellate. They never form a picture of their life. They never actually create a synthesized life that carries value. It's just one random star over here, one random star over here, one random star over here, and it never turns into a real, full lived life. It becomes a marginal life. So what do Puer Aeternus really, really, really hate? This is what's really scary. This is what's really unfortunate in life. Even if you don't make commitments, life will show up at your doorstep and force you to choose. So then they are forced into a choice. So they get some job, right? Like, you got to pay your bills somehow. So they kind of get reluctantly thrust through a particular door. But that's not a career, right? They're not making a choice that I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. In fact, they hate their job. Their job is beneath them, but they're forced into a choice. Then what they do is they half-ass it, right? Because it's not this fantasy that they're I'm meant for more than stacking boxes. This does not take advantage of my brilliance. And since it's less than their fantasy, they start to long for their fantasy, right? So I end up being what I hate more than anything else, which is an ordinary human being, but in my mind, I have great, great, great dreams. So the more ordinary my life is, the more that I hate it. I'm certainly not going to commit to an ordinary life. That's a terrible idea. So there's this fundamental discrepancy that prevents them from anytime they try to move forward in life, they're disappointed. And they're terrified if they move forward. Well, what if I end up in a life that's disappointing? I don't want that. I don't want to be trapped. They need escape more than anything else. They need freedom to have their fantasies become realities. And that's what they're terrified of. They have this belief that in the perfect circumstances, my perfection will come out, right? That the road to living my dreams is not hard, drab work for 10 or 15 years with a possibility that it never will happen. If I can just find something that brings this 24 hours of manic hard work out, I know I can do it in the right circumstances. So what they go doing is hunting for circumstances over and over and over again that will bring out their perfection. The second thing that they tend to do is blame their circumstances. The craziest thing that they blame as a circumstance is themselves. They blame prior you. So this is what's really important. We may think that this is taking responsibility. It's not taking responsibility. Because if you took responsibility for your past mistakes, you would change now. You would actually correct them. But they don't correct their mistakes. What they do is blame prior them as a circumstance. Oh, if I had made the right choice back then, I wouldn't be in this situation. But that doesn't mean they make the right choice today, right? So this is what's really interesting is there's this weird self-blame without responsibility. But they'll say I never learned how, my parents didn't teach me this. I missed the boat on that. And they're blaming their circumstances for their inability to bring their fantasies to life. Normally when you're behind in life, the way to catch up is through an excessive amount of drab, dreary ass work. Boring shit after boring shit after boring shit, day after day, year after year. That's actually how you put together your life. But the thought of that is so terrifying, I would rather wear the safety blanket of it's impossible for me to fix my life. Classic Puer Aeternus. Okay. The next thing is that they tend to be fragile. They have an image of themselves that is fragile. There is a lot of drab, dreary work, right? Like going to fucking Alcoholics Anonymous meetings 3 times a week, coming to therapy, changing your social situation, deleting contacts from your phone, grinding, going to places that make you feel uncomfortable, but they don't want to do all of those little steps. They would rather just go to some psychedelic retreat and be cured, or just suffer and say it's unsolvable. The one thing they will never do is the hard work. There's a certain fragility to them that they actually hold on to. They prioritize, that they have a defensive arrogance. In addition, there is an arrogant attitude toward other people due to both an inferiority complex and false feelings of superiority. Such people also usually have great difficulty in finding the right kind of job, for whatever they find is never quite right or quite what they wanted. There's always a hair in the soup. I can't be grateful that at least I'm getting soup that's pretty tasty. The moment that I find a hair, it's gone. So they have this weird like defensive ego, right? Where they need to be greater than other people. I will be great or I will be nothing at all. This is what they're also terrified of. Doing a lot of work that doesn't pay off. The idea of wasting time is so terrifying to them that they never end up making a commitment, and they end up wasting time again and again and again and again, right? So they end up creating the life which is exactly what they're terrified of. So there's this weird like paradoxical kind of thing where like I feel superior to people even though I'm below them. And that's what we know, is that narcissism is rooted in insecurity. Okay, if you're trapped in this cycle, how do you fix it? So let's talk about this. Jung spoke of one cure, work. And having said that, he has hesitated for just a minute and thought, is it really as simple as that? Is that just the one cure? Work is the one disagreeable word which no Puer Aeternus likes to hear. So how do you fix this problem? There's one central thing that prevents a Puer Aeternus from actually paradoxically living up to their potential. And that is that they are unable to make sacrifices. They're unable to make commitments, right? So the whole problem of being a pluripotent stem cell is the moment that I choose to major in something, something may not work out. And so if you want to get out of this complex, you will notice that in your mind, if you're someone who's trapped in this complex, what you will notice is that you're always looking at the upside, always looking at the upside, always looking at the upside, never wanting to pay the downside, never wanting to pay the cost. And the one thing that you can never do is pay the cost without the gain. So Puer Aeterni want to see a guarantee of the value of their efforts before they ever begin. But the world doesn't work that way, which is why they struggle so much. But I don't want an entry-level position. I want a strategic position where my ideas will be respected. They won't work at a job, but they will absolutely start a company, right? Because the other thing about starting a company, and then even if the company requires them to make commitments, then the company will fall apart. But as long as they can do it as a side hustle, as long as it doesn't restrict their potential, they can do anything. And this is the problem with life. Building a life means giving up your potential. Generally speaking, that's what we do. This is why things like commitment are so hard for them, even relationship commitment. They will absolutely exist in these like loading zone relationships. Every decision that you are considering making, you are terrified of the cost of the decision, of the closing off of possibilities. But the life that they crave is achieved precisely through that. Having a meaningful, healthy, and fulfilling relationship means settling. I have to settle. And that's the one thing that they cannot do. And then the really terrifying thing is that like the doors start to close, right? And then once the doors start to close, you go to this aspect of blaming. And the favorite person to blame is former you. And now it's not possible anymore. But if you kind of look at it, now that it's not possible, this excuses you from making a commitment. This excuses you from the drab, dreary work that you need to do to make up for the lost time. Because when you've fallen behind in life by like discovering something magnificent, by winning the lottery, you really make up for it by like grinding extra hard. But their fantasy tells them, no, there's some way. If I find the perfect circumstance, if I find the right business partners, if I find this, like I can be a 32-year-old, I can be broke at 32 and be a billionaire at 35. Since they're unwilling to commit, since they're unwilling to do drab work, then suddenly they're 35 and they're exactly where they started. They haven't moved at all. And now the problem becomes worse. So now you need a more fantastical thing to save you. And this is the core of the psychological problem. This is what Jung really discovered. Is that they cannot make a commitment, they cannot make a sacrifice, they cannot pay a cost without a guarantee of a gain. And if you cannot do that, you will never move forward in life. So the most important thing to do if you're stuck in the cycle is focus on the cost, not the gain. What they sort of look at is they look at the upside, what it could be. They're focused, their eyes are on the fantasy, not the reality, because the reality is drab. And when you get attracted by the fantasy and you encounter the reality, hold on, this is where I wanted to go, but this is what it is, then you go back to square one. And at least you feel safe because you didn't invest too much. What I would tell you to do is think about the loss of potential and try to get rid of as much potential as you can, because the potential is what is paralyzing you. It's what allows, it's what traps you or makes it incapable for you to actually take a step forward. And that's exactly what you need to do. Start sacrificing your potential in chunks. The second thing that's really important for Puer Aeternus is to recognize that the real work is internal, that the struggles that you need to fight are internal. But first of all, think about closing off potential, because that's what life is. Your potential doors are closing. You have to make a choice, or you don't have to make a choice. You can continue swimming around in the loading zone. And when you make that choice, you are right. You will be trapped. You will be trapped by that choice. It'll absolutely trap you. It will be drab. It will be dreary. You will be trapped. You will pay a high price and you won't have anything to show for it. That's how you break out. That's the core of the complex. If you can shift this one thing, you will break free of it. And the big irony is that once you break free of it, then you open the door to constellating your life. You open your door to no longer living a marginal existence. You open the door to actually building something that you can be proud of instead of having a heroic fantasy that is like still bypassing all of the drab, normal, plebby kind of stuff, okay? Oftentimes they struggle with small things too. So I'd say on a last practical note is focus on small things. And this is why I think that, like, you know, Jordan Peterson, I think, really likes Carl Jung, and he talks about cleaning your room. And I think that's a really good thing. So oftentimes your life is built not out of like fantastical 24-hour spurts of movement, but in like really practical small things that are done day in and day out, which feel drab. So you should try to make your life as drab, dreary, and trapped as possible with lopping off sections of potential. And if you do this, you will no longer be a Puer Aeternus. You will literally grow the fuck up. And what does it mean to be an adult? An adult means fucking doing the laundry, doing the dishes, emptying the dishwasher, doing the dishes again,